Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a presentation of comparative literature and translation studies, and I am going to present about translation studies. Ganesh Devy's views on Indians' perspective of translation studies. So, me and Aditi both are going to present about this topic. Is my screen visible? I think it is. Okay. Introduction. Ganesh Devi is one who is looking for Indian languages, and Ganesh Devi was a professor at Maharaja Sayaji Rao University, Baroda, and he is also critic, thinker, editor, educator, and activist. And apart from this, there are many linguistic and critics who work on the Indian English languages, and those their articles are very useful to us in translation studies. And those are Namavar Singh, Kapil Kapoor, and Eke Singh. We can find the Indian perspective of translation history in their articles. So, what is in this article? This article is about the importance of translation in transmitting literary movement across the linguistic borders. And in this article, Ganesh Devi begins this article with the perspective of Christian metaphysics and ends with the Indian metaphysics, that how the translation comes into existence according to both perspective. Various acts of translation include the origin of literary movements and literary traditions. Translations are widely regarded as unoriginal, and aesthetic of translation have received little attention. So, in this article, Ganesh Devi has mentioned that according to Christian Western views, translation is a very unoriginal, or they believe in the idea of the other or the origin. The article is start with the very quotation like translation is the wandering existence of a text in a perpetual exile, because Christian mythology is believed in fall, exile, and wandering. So through that we can say that they are not believing in translation in a positive way, because they are seeing it as a fall or exile. Christian myth post Babel crisis. So, the biblical story of Tower Babel in the book of Genesis is one of the most famous mythological stories in the Bible. And according to that, what is in this story, and what is how this story is related to the existence of translation according to the Western metaphysics. So, according to this story, the descendants of Noah committed a sin after a great flood when they failed to create a society befitting God's will, and instead of creating that society, they created a big tower to reach into the heaven. And when Noah come to know about this, he destroyed that tower, and after committing this sin, they said to the descendants that you are not able to speak any languages, and if you have to create a new language to understand each other. And from this, it is believed that from this the translation of the language is coming. So this is the view of Western metaphysics that Ganesh Devi has at the very beginning of this article mentioned. Now, okay, in Western metaphysics, translation is an exile, a fall from the origin, and the mythical exile is a metaphorical translation, a post-Babel crisis, as we have seen the story of this translation. So, no critics has taken any well-defined position about the exact placement of translation in literary histories, because Western literary criticism provides for the guilt of translation for coming into being after the original. They believe in the concept of the original, and they believe that the translation is coming after the original. So, according to their perspective, translation is seen as the derogatory way. And in this article, Ganesh Devi's views are totally opposite, because he is seeing translation as very positive way. And at the end of conclusion, I will mention about the Indian perspective of the translation. Now, for the key argument, I would like to call Aditi.
Now, let's continue with key arguments. On this article, two or three critics do arguments, and let's see the Roman Jacobson's argument. Raymond, Roman Jacobson, in his essay on the linguistic of translation, proposed the threefold classification of translation. First one is those from one variable order to another verbal order within the same language system. Second one is those from one language system to another language system, and third one is those from a verbal order to another system of signs. It is, however, necessary to acknowledge that synonym within one language system can't be conceptually identical with synonym between the two different languages. Historical linguistics has some useful premise in this regard. In order to explain linguistic language, historical linguistics employs the concept of cinematic differential as well as that of phonetic glides, while the linguistic changes with a single linguistic changes occur more predominantly due to cinematic differentiation, and they also show marked phonetic glides. And however, the degree of such glides is more pronounced when a new language comes its existence. And let's see J.C. Catford's argument. In a linguistic theory of translation, J.C. Catford gives a comprehensive declaration of theoretical formulation regarding the linguistic of translation, in which he attempts to distinguish several linguistic levels of translation. And because of translation is a linguistic act, and any theory of translation must originate from linguistic. According to his main premise, translation is a linguistic operation, the process of replacing a text in one language for a text in another. Hence, any theory of translation must rest on a theory of language, a general linguistic theory. And next, we can see about the analysis and findings. And various dominants of humanistic knowledge were divided into three categories in Europe during 19th century. First one is comparative studies for Europe, second one is Orientalism for the Orient, and third one is the anthropology for the rest of the world. And in other words, various linguistic changes with a single language and predominantly of a cinematic nature. The linguistic difference between two closely related languages are prominently phonetics. After discovery of Sanskrit by Sir William Jones, historical linguistics in Europe depend heavily on Orientalism, and for a long time afterwards, linguistics followed the path of comparative philosophy. And following Sir William Jones' discovery of Sanskrit, historical linguistics in Europe became increasingly reliant on Orientalism. And the problems in translation study, the translation problem is not just a linguistic problem, it is an aesthetic and ideological problem with an important bearing on the question of literary history. And literary translation is not just a replication of a text in another verbal system of signs, it is a replication of an ordered subsystem of signs within a given language in another corresponding ordered subsystem of signs within a related language. Like a literary text that continue belongs to their original periods and styles, and also exist through successive chronological periods, translation at once approximates the original and trends it. The problems of origin has not been tackled satisfactory. And to conclusion, I would like to call the.
Yes, thank you, Aditi. So to conclude, we can say that in this article, at the conclusion of this article, Ganesh Devi has mentioned, has given a very interesting metaphor to the translation. He says that translation is like a soul, and as a soul passes one body to another body, and by passing that, soul does not does not lose their essential significance. And likewise, translation, if we translate from one language to another, from Gujarati to English, we cannot lose that essence, because it is very necessary to translate one language from another. Comparative literature means that there are regions of significance that are shared across two related languages, as well as area of significance that can never be shared. And the true taste either is the writer's capacity to transform, to translate, and to restate, to revitalize the original. And in that sense, Indian literary traditions are essentially traditions of translation. So translation is seen in this article very positive way by Ganesh Dev. Thank you, everyone.